The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which is objectively the worst day to have your life ruined. It had the heft of a wedding invitation, but none of the joy. Instead, it smelled faintly of lavender and condescension. It sat in the otherwise cheerful pile of mail, a coupon for a large pizza, a catalog for outdoor gear I'd never use, and a bill I was actively pretending didn't exist. But this envelope, this thick, cream-colored cardstock, felt different. It felt like judgment. My name is Leo Maxwell, and I'm a graphic designer. This means I spend about 8 hours a day moving pixels around a screen until they look like something a client is willing to pay for, and the other 8 hours contemplating the crushing meaninglessness of it all. I work from home, a small 2-bedroom ranch that I'd bought from a sweet old lady named Mrs. Petrie a year ago. It wasn't perfect. The floors creaked, one of the windows refused to open unless you sweet-talked it, and the color of the guest bathroom was a shade of seafoam green that could only be described as nauseous. But it was mine. The best part of the house, my favorite part, was the ivy. A magnificent, chaotic tapestry of English ivy covered the entire west-facing wall, a living, breathing mural that changed with the seasons. In the spring, it was a riot of brilliant green, in the summer, a deep, lush emerald, and in the fall, it turned into a patchwork of gold and crimson. Mrs. Petrie had told me, on the day I got the keys, "The ivy has more character than most people in this neighborhood, dear. Let it be." I had taken her advice to heart. Maybe a little too much to heart. I let it be. I let it be all over the place. I slit the envelope open with my thumb, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. The letterhead read, in a swirling, self-important font, Pleasant Valley Meadows Homeowners Association. Oh good, the beige police. "Dear Mr. Maxwell," it began, the politeness already feeling like a threat. "This letter serves as an official notice of a violation of the community bylaws. Following a routine neighborhood inspection on October 3, 2025, your property at 124 Willow Creek Lane was found to be in breach of Section 4, Subsection B, Paragraph 7, unkempt and overgrown foliage." Unkempt. The word stung. My ivy wasn't unkempt. It was free-spirited. It was creatively untamed. It was organic, abstract expressionism. The aforementioned English ivy on the western-facing exterior wall has been deemed to exceed the acceptable aesthetic standards of the community, the letter continued. Its current state detracts from the harmonious visual continuity we strive to maintain in Pleasant Valley Meadows. Harmonious visual continuity. That was their term for the endless sea of identical beige houses, manicured lawns cut to precisely 2 inches, and the same 3 pre-approved species of shrubbery. My house, with its glorious wall of green chaos, was a middle finger to their beige utopia. A fine of $200 has been assessed to your account. Please be advised that an additional fine of $50 will be levied for each day. The violation is not rectified. Rectification, in this case, means the complete removal of the offending foliage. My jaw dropped. $200? $50 a day? For what? For having the most interesting house on the block? I read the final line, and that's when the rage truly began to simmer. "We appreciate your prompt attention to this matter in helping us keep Pleasant Valley Meadows a truly pleasant valley. Sincerely, Carol Higgins, President, HOA." Carol. Of course. I walked to my living room window, parting the blinds just enough to peer out. And there she was, Carol Higgins, in the flesh. She was across the street, wearing a ridiculously wide-brimmed sun hat, khaki capris, and a polo shirt the color of weak tea. She was tending to her garden, which consisted of perfectly uniform, unnervingly symmetrical rows of pink petunias. Not a single weed dared to exist in her presence. As if sensing my gaze, she looked up. She gave me a tight, triumphant smile and a little wave with one of her pristine gardening gloves. She knew. She had orchestrated the whole thing. I let the blinds snap shut. I looked back at the letter in my hand. It felt heavier now, weighted with the smug satisfaction of a woman who probably alphabetized her canned goods. This wasn't about visual harmony. This was a declaration of war. A war fought with bylaws and fines and passive-aggressive pleasantries. I crumpled the letter into a tight ball, the thick cardstock crackling in protest. Then I immediately uncrumpled it, smoothing it out on my coffee table with frantic, angry motions. I was going to need it for evidence. Evidence of what, I wasn't sure yet. But this was an injustice of the highest suburban order. My Ivy, my beautiful, character-filled Ivy, had been slandered. And I, its lazy, non-confrontational guardian, was going to have to do something about it. For the next 24 hours, I spiraled. My typical response to conflict is to ignore it until it hopefully gets bored and goes away. But this felt different. This was personal. The $1.50 a day threat was ticking like a tiny, expensive time bomb in the back of my mind. My first stage of grief was, naturally, denial, which quickly morphed into a frantic, caffeine-fueled research session. I fell deep into the internet's darkest corners, HOA forums. It was a horror show. I read tales of people being fined for leaving their garage door open for more than an hour, for having a basketball hoop that wasn't the pre-approved shade of gray, for flying a flag that wasn't the American flag or the official state flag. One poor soul in Arizona got a violation notice because his wind chimes were deemed tonally disruptive. It was a world of petty tyrants and weaponized rulers, and Carol Higgins was clearly aiming for the presidency. I spent hours poring over the Pleasant Valley Meadows bylaws, a document so dense with legalese and mundane restrictions that it felt like it could suck the very soul out of your body through your eyes. There it was, Section 4, Subsection B, Paragraph 7. Unkempt and overgrown foliage. The language was infuriatingly vague. What constituted unkempt? Who was the final arbiter of botanical tidiness? It was a subjective clause designed for maximum abuse by someone with a ruler and too much time on their hands. There were no loopholes, no appeals process that didn't involve groveling before Carol and her beige council. Defeated, I did what any man on the brink of a suburban crisis would do. I called my best friend. Mark answered the video call with a mouthful of what looked like takeout noodles. "Leo, you look like you've just seen a ghost." "Worse," I said, holding the letter up to the camera. "I've received a communique from the hive mind." I explained the situation. The ivy, the fine, the daily penalty. The soul-crushing phrase, harmonious visual continuity. Mark, an engineer who happily paid exorbitant rent for a shoebox apartment downtown precisely to avoid this kind of thing, was having the time of his life. "Dude, this is hilarious," he said, slurping a noodle. "You've been officially designated the neighborhood weirdo." "It's not funny, Mark. This is tyranny. My house is being artistically oppressed." "It's a plant, Leo. A plant that's actively trying to eat your house. Just trim it. Buy a hedge trimmer, spend a Saturday afternoon listening to a podcast, and make it look like a nice, respectable green box. Problem solved." "You don't get it?" I groaned, pacing around my office. "It's not about the ivy anymore. It's about the principle. She called it an eyesore. An offending foliage. This ivy has been here longer than her. Mrs. Petrie said it was planted by her grandfather. It has history. It has character. And it also probably has spiders," Mark countered. "Look, I know you. You hate confrontation. The path of least resistance is the Leo Maxwell way. Just cut the damn thing and pay the fine." He was right, of course. That was my way. But something about Carol's smug little wave had flipped a switch in my brain. The path of least resistance felt like surrender. It felt like letting the beige win. "No," I said, a strange resolve hardening in my voice. "No, I'm not giving her the satisfaction." "So, what are you going to do? Challenge her to a duel? Demand a trial by combat on her perfectly manicured lawn?" "I don't know," I mumbled, ending the call and slumping back into my chair. He was right. What could I do? I stared blankly at my computer screen. A project I was working on for a new artisanal pickle company was open in my design software. The client wanted a logo that was rustic yet modern, with a playful sense of authority. I was currently trying to choose a font. I clicked through the options, watching the word pickles transform from a stern, blocky serif to a flowing, whimsical script. Serif, sans serif, slab serif. Kerning, tracking, leading. The arcane language of typography that was my entire world. I sighed, rubbing my temples, and glanced out the window at the wall of ivy. My problem. My big, green $500 and counting problem. My eyes went from the ivy, a chaotic mess of leaves and vines, back to my screen, where the letters of the word pickles stood in clean, orderly lines. Ivy, letters, letters, ivy. And then it hit me. It wasn't a lightning bolt of inspiration. It was more like a slow, creeping, gloriously petty sunrise. A smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in 2 days. The bylaw said, unkempt and overgrown. It didn't say the ivy couldn't be arranged. It didn't say the foliage couldn't be communicative. They wanted me to tidy it up? Fine. I would tidy it up into the most meticulously, maliciously compliant work of art this neighborhood had ever seen. I grabbed my sketchbook and a pencil, my heart pounding with the thrill of a truly terrible, wonderful idea. I flew to the window and took a quick photo of the wall with my phone, then imported it into my design software. I overlaid a grid on the image of the ivy-covered wall. This would be my canvas. What would the message be? Something simple to start, a proof of concept. I started sketching, my pencil flying across the page. I drew guide wires. I drew trellis patterns. I drew individual leaves being trained to follow a path. The rage and despair that had been churning in my gut for 2 days transformed into pure, unadulterated creative energy. Mark was wrong. The Leo Maxwell way wasn't the path of least resistance. The Leo Maxwell way was the path of the most elaborate, unnecessarily complicated, passive-aggressive resistance imaginable. I stood up and walked to the window, sketchbook in hand, and looked at my leafy accomplice. "All right, you leafy menace," I whispered to the ivy, a wild glint in my eye. "You and I are going to war." My artistic vision was grand. My practical skills, however, were, let's say, underdeveloped. After spending an hour on a wobbly stepladder trying to attach a single piece of wire to the wall, nearly falling twice, and getting a face full of what was either a spiderweb or a ghost, I accepted a humbling truth. I needed help. I needed someone with a bigger ladder, stronger hands, and a lower sense of self-preservation. I needed a contractor. My journey into the world of professional handymen began online. It was not promising. Contractor #1 was from a company called Verdant Vistas. His name was Chad, and he spoke with the slick, confident tone of someone who calls himself a landscape architect and charges you $200 just to look at your lawn. "So, you're looking for a vertical garden installation," Chad said over the phone, the sound of keyboard clicking in the background. "Excellent. We specialize in bespoke living walls. Our Verdant wall package starts at $5,000. It includes a quarterly maintenance plan, soil pH balancing, and integrated drip irrigation." "Right," I said slowly. "My budget is more in the couple cases of beer and a pizza range, and it's less of a living wall and more of a spite hedge." There was a pause. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." "Never mind." I hung up. Contractor #2 was a woman named Luna, whom I found on a community wellness page. Her business was called Gaia's Touch Gardening. "Before I can work with any plant," she explained in a dreamy, faraway voice, "I'll need to commune with its spirit. I'll come over, we'll sit with the ivy, maybe burn some sage, and I'll listen to what it wants to express. The plant's consent is paramount. I'm pretty sure it wants to express a 5-letter word, and I can't afford to wait for it to learn English," I said. "Thanks for your time." I was about to give up and just buy the biggest, most dangerous-looking hedge trimmer I could find when I stumbled upon a post on a local classifieds forum. It was buried between an ad for a used couch and a desperate plea for a lost parakeet. The ad was simple, no frills, and written in all caps. "Sal's odd jobs, roofing, gutters, hauling, whatever. No job too weird, seriously, try me." It was the "seriously, try me" that got me. It felt less like a sales pitch and more like a challenge. I called the number. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Sal." "Hi, Sal," I said. "I saw your ad. I think I have a job that qualifies as weird." An hour later, a beaten-up Ford F-150 that looked like it had personally survived the Cretaceous period rumbled to a stop in front of my house. A man who was built like a refrigerator with a head on it climbed out. He had to be in his late 50s, with a magnificent beer gut, a salt and pepper mustache, and hands the size of dinner plates. He wore a faded flannel shirt over a grease-stained t-shirt, and he surveyed my house with a perpetually unimpressed expression. This was Sal. "You're the word plant kid?" he grunted by way of greeting. I nervously held up my sketchbook, which now contained detailed 2-scale renderings of my typographic vision. "Leo, and yes, that's me. It's less word plant and more botanical messaging." Sal took the sketchbook from me. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. He squinted at my careful drawings of the grid system, the guide wires, the diagram showing how to train a tendril around a corner to form a perfect L. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice a low rumble. He pointed a thumb thick as a sausage at the ivy-covered wall. "You want me to build a giant word search puzzle on the side of your house for a plant?" "Essentially, yes," I said, trying to sound confident. "It's a statement piece, a protest against suburban conformity." Sal didn't answer. He just stood there, stroking his mustache and looking back and forth between my ridiculous sketchbook and my very normal-looking house. The silence stretched on, thick and awkward. I was sure he was about to laugh in my face, get back in his Jurassic truck, and drive away. Then, he looked across the street. His gaze settled on Carol Higgins's house. She was out front, of course, using a level to make sure her mailbox was perfectly perpendicular to the ground. She glanced over at us, her expression a mixture of suspicion and disapproval. A slow grin spread across Sal's face, cracking his stony facade. It was a beautiful, terrifying thing to behold. "That woman," he said, pointing at Carol with the sketchbook. "The one with the binder. She stopped me last week while I was on a roofing job down the street. Told me my truck was leaking vitality onto the asphalt. My heart leaped, an ally. She told me my ivy lacked harmonious visual continuity." Sal let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Harmonious visual continuity? What the hell does that even mean?" "I think it's HOA speak for not beige," I offered. He handed the sketchbook back to me. "Kid, you've got yourself a contractor." He looked my house up and down again, a professional glint in his eye. "This is gonna need stainless steel wire, 1/4-inch turnbuckles to keep it taut, and a whole lot of masonry anchors. And since it's the dumbest damn thing I've ever been asked to build, the weird job premium applies." "How premium are we talking?" I asked, my wallet wincing in anticipation. "I'll take a flat fee plus materials," he said. And you keep me supplied with cold beer and sandwiches. The good kind, with extra meat." "Deal," I said, shaking his massive hand. It felt like grabbing a handful of gravel and leather. And just like that, the rebellion had its first soldier. Sal became my gruff, cynical, and surprisingly meticulous co-conspirator. Our working relationship was an odd couple masterpiece. He'd be up on the scaffolding, drilling a hole into a brick, while I stood on the ground directing him with hand signals like a deranged air traffic controller. "A little to the left, Sal. The ascender on the H needs to be perfectly vertical," I'd yell. "It's a plant, Leo, not a damn spaceship," he'd yell back, but he'd move the wire a little to the left. He mocked my artistic sensibilities relentlessly, calling my sketchbook the Bush Bible, and referring to the project as Operation Stupid. But there was a grudging respect between us. He was a master craftsman, a pragmatist who could solve any structural problem with a grunt and a piece of scrap metal from his truck. I was the crazy visionary, the ideas guy. Together, we were building something absurd, something beautiful, something that was going to drive Carol Higgins completely, utterly insane. For the next 2 weeks, my life revolved around wire, leaves, and sandwiches. Sal's beat-up truck became a permanent fixture in front of my house, a rustic monument to rebellion that I knew was driving Carol nuts. We worked from morning until dusk, a well-oiled machine of sarcasm and spite. Operation Verdant Compliments, as I'd dramatically dubbed it, was officially underway. The first step was building the canvas. Sal, with the precision of a surgeon and the vocabulary of a sailor, installed a massive, near-invisible grid of stainless steel wire across the entire wall. It was a masterpiece of engineering, taut and perfectly spaced. From the street, you could barely see it, but up close, it was an intricate metal web, ready to receive my leafy instructions. "All right, Picasso," Sal grunted one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. "Your fancy spiderweb is done. Now comes the hard part, teaching a salad how to read." The work was slow and painstaking. We'd stand on the scaffolding Sal had erected, carefully untangling ivy tendrils and weaving them along the guide wires, securing them with little green zip ties. Each leaf had to be positioned just so. It was like bonsai, but on a 40-foot scale and fueled by cheap lager. We developed a rhythm. I'd point to a vine, and Sal, with his surprisingly nimble fingers, would coax it into place. Our project did not go unnoticed. Our most loyal supporter was Mrs. Gable, my elderly next-door neighbor. She was a tiny woman with a cloud of white hair and eyes that twinkled with mischief. She had lived in the neighborhood for 50 years and had seen a dozen HOA presidents come and go. She despised Carol. Every afternoon around 3, she'd shuffle over with a tray holding a pitcher of ice-cold lemonade and a plate of oatmeal raisin cookies. "How goes the war, boys?" she'd whisper conspiratorially, her eyes darting towards Carol's house. "We're winning the Battle of the Vines, ma'am," Sal would say, tipping an imaginary cap. "I saw Carol this morning," Mrs. Gable reported one day, her voice low. She was timing the garbage truck stop with a stopwatch, said it was lingering for an unapproved duration. "You give her hell, Leo. You give her hell for all of us." She became our lookout, our quartermaster, and our biggest cheerleader. We also acquired a nemesis, a fat, brazen squirrel who seemed to have a personal vendetta against our project. He'd chew through the zip ties, steal our measuring tape, and sit on a branch just out of reach, chittering at us in what I was certain was squirrel profanity. Sal named him General Nuts. Our days became a 3-way battle. Us versus the ivy, us versus the clock on the HOA fine, and us versus a rodent with a Napoleon complex. Carol's surveillance, meanwhile, was constant and unnerving. She'd find any excuse to be outside. One day she was aggressively weeding her flawless flower beds. The next she was power washing her already spotless driveway. She never spoke to us directly, but we could feel her eyes on us. She'd make notes in a little spiral-bound notebook, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval. "Oh, finally taking care of that eyesore?" she called out one morning, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "It's about time. What is all that metal for? Are you electrifying it?" "It's for structural integrity, Carol," I called back cheerfully, "and for maintaining harmonious visual continuity." Sal snorted so hard he almost dropped a wrench. To keep our grand design a secret, we bought a massive, ugly brown tarp and hung it over the section of the wall where the first word was taking shape. This, of course, only made Carol more suspicious. The tarp was, in her eyes, probably a violation of 16 different bylaws. I half expected to get a fine for unkempt and overgrown tarp. The days bled together in a haze of green leaves, tangled wires, and Sal's running commentary. "You know, for what I'm charging you," he said one afternoon, as we meticulously formed the curve of a letter O, "you could have just paved this whole wall and painted a picture of a middle finger on it." "It's about subtlety, Sal," I said, stepping back to admire our work. "It's about artistry. We're not just trimming a hedge, we're creating a dialogue." "Looks like a dialogue that's going to get your ass sued," he grumbled. But there was a definite hint of pride in his voice. He was invested now. This wasn't just a weird job anymore. This was his Sistine Chapel of spite. As the second week drew to a close, the shape was undeniable, hidden though it was behind the tarp. The vines were cooperating, the letters were crisp, and our supplies of beer and zip ties were running dangerously low. The initial $200 fine had ballooned to an eye-watering $900. The pressure was on. It was time to unveil Phase 1. It was time to say hello. The night before the unveiling, a nervous energy crackled between Sal and me. We did our final checks under the dim glow of the porch light, tightening a few stray tendrils and trimming any errant leaves that dared to break the clean line of our creation. The tarp billowed slightly in the breeze, a drab curtain waiting to be pulled back on our masterpiece. "You ready for this, kid?" Sal asked, cracking his knuckles. "Once we show this thing, there's no going back. The crazy plant guy train has officially left the station." "I was born ready, Sal," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Let's give them something to talk about." Under the cover of darkness, feeling like a pair of second-story men about to pull off a jewel heist, we untied the ropes and let the lower half of the tarp fall away. We didn't stick around to admire it. We packed up our tools, Sal rumbled off in his truck, and I retreated into my house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, feeling like a kid on Christmas morning. I made coffee with trembling hands and took my position at the living room window, peeking through the blinds. The street was quiet. Then, at precisely 7:45 a.m., Carol Higgins's front door opened. She emerged, dressed in a powder blue tracksuit for her morning power walk. She stretched, looked both ways, and then her eyes fell upon my house, and she froze. From my vantage point, I could see it perfectly. There, on the lower half of my wall, in perfectly sculpted 4-foot-tall letters crafted from the very ivy she'd condemned, was a single, cheerful word. "Hello." Carol just stood there, motionless, on her perfect driveway. Her jaw was slack. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, a flicker of something that might have been grudging admiration, and finally pure, unadulterated rage. Her face turned a shade of crimson that clashed horribly with her tracksuit. She marched across the street, her power walk turning into a power stomp, a fresh new binder already clutched in her hand. I met her at my front door, leaning against the frame with a serene smile I'd been practicing in the mirror. "Good morning, Carol," I said. "What?" she seethed, jabbing a finger towards the wall. "Is the meaning of this?" "The meaning of what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Oh, that. Hello to you, too. I just thought I'd tidy up the ivy like you asked. Make it a bit more welcoming. More harmonious, you know?" "This is not harmonious," she shrieked, flipping furiously through her binder. This is horticultural graffiti. It's a flagrant disregard for the rules. There is no bylaw for alphabetical shrubbery." "Well then," I said with a shrug, "I guess I'm not in violation of anything, am I?" Her sputtering was glorious. It was the sound of a petty tyrant's carefully constructed world crumbling around her. She pulled out her phone and stabbed at the screen with a trembling finger. "That's it. I'm calling the police." "You're calling the police on a plant for being polite?" I asked. "What's the charge? Loitering with intent to greet?" She ignored me, speaking into her phone in a high-pitched, frantic voice about community vandalism and brazen defiance. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a weary face that suggested he'd seen it all and was tired of most of it. This was Officer Miller. His partner was young, maybe my age, with a curious, amused look on his face. Officer Davis. Carol descended upon them like a hawk on a field mouse. "Officers, thank you for coming. This man," she said, pointing at me, "is terrorizing the neighborhood with his foliage." Officer Miller sighed, a deep, profound sigh that contained the existential weight of every ridiculous suburban dispute he'd ever had to mediate. He ambled over and looked at the wall. He looked at it for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at his partner. Officer Davis was actively trying not to smile, biting his lower lip. "So, let me get this straight, ma'am," Miller said, turning back to Carol, his voice a gravelly monotone. "You called 911 because his plant says hello." "It's mockery," Carol insisted. "He's mocking the homeowners association." "Is there a law against mocking an HOA?" Davis asked, a genuine note of curiosity in his voice. "There ought to be." Miller walked closer to the wall, running a hand over his chin. "Well, the ivy is kempt. I'll give him that. It's certainly not overgrown anymore." He turned to me. "This your work, son?" "Just trying to be a good neighbor, officer," I said humbly. "Ma'am," Miller said, facing Carol again, "this is a civil matter. It's his property. As far as I can see, no laws have been broken. The plant is not obscene, it's not blocking traffic, and it's not a public hazard." Davis pulled out his phone. "Mind if I get a picture of this? My wife is a graphic designer. She'll love the font choice." "Is that a custom sans serif?" "It's Helvetica inspired," I said proudly. Carol's face was a thundercloud. She had summoned the law, and the law was asking for design tips. Defeated and humiliated, she could only stammer as the officers got back in their car. As they drove away, I saw Officer Miller shake his head, and I could have sworn I saw Officer Davis laughing. I gave Carol my brightest, most neighborly wave. The first battle had been won, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that the war was just getting started. The story of the Hello House spread through Pleasant Valley meadows like wildfire. First, it was just whispers and texts between neighbors. Then came the slow, deliberate drive-bys. Cars would cruise past my house at 5 miles per hour, the occupants gawking at the wall, sometimes giving me a discreet thumbs up if they saw me in the window. I had become a local legend overnight. The weirdo who taught his plant manners. Emboldened by my victory over Carol and the local police department, I decided to escalate. This was no longer just about defiance, it was performance art. Every Sunday, Sal would come by, no longer as a contractor, but as a co-conspirator and friend. and we'd get to work altering the message. The compliments were always directed, with laser-like passive aggression, at Carol. One morning, she emerged from her house wearing a new, ridiculously wide-brimmed garden hat that looked like a satellite dish. By noon, after a swift and secret operation, the ivy on my wall read, "Nice hat." The following week, after watching her spend 20 minutes parking her sedan so it was perfectly mathematically centered in her driveway, the wall was updated. Great parking. My personal favorite was a simple, elegant message that stayed up for 2 glorious weeks. "Your lawn is so green." The neighborhood was officially divided. On one side was Carol and her small band of loyalists, the Beige Brigade, who would scowl as they passed my house. But on the other side, a growing majority was firmly on Team Ivy. People started leaving gifts on my porch: a 6-pack of craft beer, a bag of organic fertilizer, a homemade apple pie from Mrs. Gable with a note that said, "Stick it to the man, dear." The whole thing reached a tipping point when a van from the local news station pulled up. A young, sharp-looking reporter hopped out, followed by a cameraman. Her name was Chloe, and she had an infectious laugh and eyes that seemed to see right through my carefully constructed slacker persona. "Leo Maxwell?" she asked, extending a hand. "I'm Chloe from Channel 8 News. We got a tip about a horticultural dispute? Someone said you were weaponizing pleasantries." I gave her my most charmingly flustered smile. "I'm just a guy who likes to keep his garden tidy," I said. The interview was surreal. I stood in front of my ivy wall, trying to sound like a reasonable homeowner, while Chloe asked questions with a barely concealed grin. "So, your HOA fined you for overgrown ivy, and your response was to make it spell out compliments." "I believe in constructive feedback," I said solemnly, "both from myself and from my neighbors." "And what's the message you're trying to send here?" "That even in a world of rules and regulations," I said, looking directly at the camera, "there's always room for a little creativity. And politeness." The story aired that night on the 6 o'clock news. They even interviewed Carol, who came across as exactly the kind of unhinged, binder-wielding tyrant she was. "This is not about politeness," she'd said, her voice tight with rage. "This is about standards. It's about the slow, creeping vine of anarchy." My phone exploded. Friends I hadn't heard from in years were texting me links to the news clip. Mark called, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "You did it, you absolute madman. You're the Che Guevara of shrubbery." A few days later, Chloe, the reporter, showed up at my door again, this time without a camera crew. "Off the record," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "This is the best story I've covered all year." "I aim to please," I said, "the ivy and I." "I was wondering," she started a little hesitantly, "if maybe you and your Helvetica-inspired ivy would want to get some coffee sometime. I want to hear more about your philosophy of passive-aggressive gardening." My world had officially turned upside down. A week ago, I was just a schlubby graphic designer facing a crippling fine. Now I was a local folk hero, the leader of a suburban rebellion, and I had a date with a beautiful news reporter. All because of a plant, a grudge, and a healthy dose of spite. Carol had meant to ruin my day. Instead, she had accidentally made my year. Carol was not one to accept defeat. The media attention and my newfound local fame had only hardened her resolve. She saw the creeping vine of anarchy, and she was going to fight it with the only weapon she had: more rules. She called for an emergency, all-hands-on-deck HOA meeting. The sole item on the agenda was the proposal of a new bylaw, hastily drafted and dripping with her particular brand of legislative venom. Mrs. Gable, who was now my official intelligence agent inside the HOA, showed me a copy. Bylaw 17C. All exterior foliage, including but not limited to vines, climbing plants, and espaliered trees, must be maintained in its natural, non-linguistic state. The shaping of plants into letters, numbers, symbols, or any recognizable form of communication is strictly prohibited. The meeting was apparently a catastrophe for Carol. According to Mrs. Gable's gleeful debriefing, the normally sedate community room devolved into a shouting match. People who had been silent for years, bottling up their resentment over fines for holiday decorations left up 2 days too long or trash cans visible from the street for more than 6 hours, finally found their voice. They laughed her proposal off the floor. The non-linguistic state bylaw was soundly, humiliatingly defeated. Carol's reign of terror was over. While she was at the meeting, fighting for the soul of beige suburbia, Sal and I were executing our grand finale. This was the one we'd been planning for weeks, a project that utilized the entire expanse of the wall. Mark came over to help, as did Mrs. Gable, who appointed herself supervisor and director of sandwich distribution. We worked under the warm glow of portable work lights, a small team united by a common, ridiculous cause. Carol returned from the meeting after dark, her car crunching up her driveway in defeat. She got out, her shoulders slumped. She must have seen the lights on at my house, because she stopped and stared, probably readying herself for the final, sarcastic, ivy-based insult. And then she saw it. We had taken down the tarp completely. We had strung up tasteful white Christmas lights along the newly formed letters, making them glow softly in the autumn dusk. The message, stretching 20 feet wide in a beautiful, flowing script that Sal had complained was structurally unsound for a dam plant, was no longer a snarky comment. It read, "Welcome home, neighbors." It wasn't an insult. It wasn't a joke. It was a beautiful, unifying, and utterly disarming message of community. It was checkmate. Carol just stood there, silhouetted by her own perfectly symmetrical porch lights. She had come prepared for a fight, armed with bylaws and righteous indignation. But you can't fight a welcome mat. You can't find sincerity. She looked at the glowing wall, then at me as I stood on my porch. A few other neighbors had come out of their houses to see the final reveal, and they were smiling, taking pictures. She didn't say a word. She just gave a short, stiff, almost imperceptible nod and retreated into her beige house, defeated not by sarcasm, but by overwhelming, weaponized pleasantness. Months later, life in Pleasant Valley Meadows is different. The ivy wall is a permanent, beloved local landmark. Tourists, or at least people from the next town over, sometimes stop to take selfies in front of it. Sal's odd jobs business is booming. He's now the go-to guy for statement gardens and has a 3-month waiting list. I'm still designing logos from my little home office, but things have changed for me too. Chloe and I are still going out, and she's trying to convince me to start a consulting business for creative HOA compliance. I'm considering it. The original fine notice from Carol, which eventually got thrown out by the triumphant new HOA board, is framed and hanging on my office wall. It's a trophy, a reminder of the weirdest, most satisfying victory of my life. I sometimes see Carol on her morning power walks. We don't talk, but the furious glare has been replaced by a look of weary resignation. Her lawn is still perfect, her petunias are still symmetrical, but the fight has gone out of her. I'm sitting on my porch now, a beer in my hand, watching the sunset paint the sky. The white lights on the ivy wall click on, casting a gentle glow. My house isn't a blemish on the community's aesthetic harmony anymore. It's the heart of it. They say good fences make good neighbors. Turns out a 20-foot leafy complement does the job even better,